The crystal chandeliers above shimmered like 1,000 fallen stars suspended in glass, each flicker casting trembling light across the polished marble floor. For hours, the grand ballroom had pulsed with laughter, violins, and the soft clinking of champagne glasses, a symphony of wealth, beauty, and ambition. But now all that sound was gone. The music had faded mid-note. The conversations had stopped mid-sentence. Even the air itself seemed to hold its breath. At the center of it all sat Clara Winslow, her hands trembling on the wheels of her chair, the diamond necklace around her neck catching the fractured light like a broken halo. Her lips quivered. Her voice, when it came, cracked through the silence like the first thunder before a storm. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered. "I can't walk." The words hung there, not just as a plea for mercy, but as the sound of years of buried pain finally breaking through the armor she'd worn for so long. Every head turned. Every movement stopped. 1,000 eyes, once filled with judgment and polite pretense, now watched her in uneasy disbelief, and then a single sound cut through the tension, the soft, metallic clatter of a broom hitting the floor. From the far corner of the room, the janitor, the quiet man who mopped the marble every night, stepped forward. His name tag read Eli Carter. He was in his early 40s, maybe older. His hair was streaked with gray, his face worn by time and long shifts beneath fluorescent lights. But his eyes, they carried something far heavier than exhaustion, something ancient like regret carved into the soul. That night, under the shimmering chandeliers, Eli's eyes locked with Clara's, and everything in the room shifted. 3 years earlier, Clara Winslow had been unstoppable. At 38, she was already the CEO of Winslow Dynamics, one of the most influential tech firms in the country. Her name opened doors. Her signature built empires. Her mind, sharp as polished steel, had made her both feared and admired in every boardroom she entered. But success had never come without scars. Behind every magazine cover and award, behind every elegant smile and tailored suit, Clara had hidden a world of bruises no one ever saw. 3 years ago, she'd been in love, engaged to a man named Nathan Cole, a rising investment banker with charm and ambition to match her own. They were the city's golden couple, unstoppable, unbreakable, and untouchable. Until the night everything shattered. It was raining. The kind of rain that blurs city lights and makes the world look like a memory dissolving in tears. Nathan had been driving. A business call distracted him, just for a moment, and then headlights exploded across the windshield. The car spun. Metal screamed. Glass shattered. When Clara woke, the world had changed. Her legs no longer answered her. Her reflection no longer looked like her. The woman who had built everything from strength now had to learn how to move through the world again with wheels beneath her and pain within her. And then, when she needed love most, Nathan left. He said he couldn't handle it, that she had changed. He didn't mean her body. He meant her silence, the mask in the months that followed. Clara buried herself in work. She built walls around her heart, fortresses of polished glass and steel, and filled them with success, with awards, with admiration from people who didn't know her. To the world she remained perfect, flawless, poised, unbreakable. But every night in the solitude of her penthouse office, she stared out at the skyline and wondered what it all meant. Power without peace was hollow. Success without love was noise. And silence was louder than applause. The gala, the annual Winslow Dynamics Gala, was meant to celebrate innovation, legacy, and leadership. But to Clara, it was an exhausting theater of masks. Men in tuxedos spoke in half-truths. Women in sequins smiled with envy. And everywhere she turned, she could feel the same subtle pity, the kind that hides behind polite admiration. She wheeled herself through the crowd, her movements smooth, practiced, regal. She smiled, nodded, laughed where expected. But inside she felt like glass about to crack, and then she saw him, Eli Carter, the janitor, in a faded blue uniform, pushing a mop with quiet grace, moving in and out of the light like a ghost of humility. His hands were rough, hands that told stories of labor, loss, and survival. And though he never looked directly at anyone, his eyes seemed to see everything. For reasons she couldn't explain, Clara felt drawn to him. Not out of pity, but out of recognition. as if his silence matched her own. The moment when the silence fell in that ballroom, when fear froze every breath, Eli was the only one who moved. He walked toward Clara slowly, his shadow stretching long across the marble. "Miss Winslow," he said quietly, his voice carrying the kind of calm that comes only from someone who has seen storms before. She looked up, her eyes wide, tears trembling at the edges. The fear in her voice was fading now, replaced by something else: curiosity, recognition, memory. "Do I know you?" she asked. Eli paused. And in that moment the world seemed to narrow to just the two of them. The powerful woman who had lost everything, and the man everyone overlooked. He took a slow breath. "Yes," he said softly. "You did. Once." The secret years ago, before the accident, Clara's company had been expanding, building new labs, hiring hundreds. One of those hires was Eli Carter, then a lead engineer. He'd worked quietly in her division, rarely speaking, always producing results. But after a series of financial cuts, a project of his had been shut down. And in the chaos that followed, he'd taken the blame for a system error that wasn't his fault. He was fired, blacklisted, lost everything. And Clara, too busy, too distracted, too ambitious, had signed the papers herself, never realizing what the decision would cost him. Now he stood before her, not as the man she once dismissed, but as the janitor cleaning her floors. "I didn't come here for revenge," he said quietly. "I came because I needed work, and because I wanted to see if forgiveness was still possible." The word struck her deeper than any wound ever had. Forgiveness. That word she'd long forgotten how to say, to others, and to herself. Tears slipped down her cheeks, soft as the music that began again in the distance. The redemption. Clara looked at Eli, really looked at him. The weary hands, the humble posture, the unshakable grace. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Not for tonight, for then, for not seeing you, for not listening." Eli nodded slowly, and for the first time in years a faint smile touched his face. "Sometimes," he said, "we have to fall to learn how to stand again, even if standing looks different than before." Clara's chest ached. Her tears weren't from pain this time, but from the weight finally lifting. She reached out her hand. Eli took it. For a long moment, nothing else existed. The chandeliers shimmered. The whispers faded. And in that silence, forgiveness bloomed between two broken souls who had both been overlooked, one by the world, the other by herself. Epilogue months later. The headlines told a different story. Winslow Dynamics launches new humanitarian division. CEO Clara Winslow appoints former janitor as director of compassionate innovation. But what the world didn't see were the quiet evenings when Clara and Eli sat in her office, talking about life, redemption, and how even the smallest kindness can change everything. The world had known Clara Winslow as the Iron Woman, but those who truly met her after that night knew her as something far greater. A woman who finally learned that strength was not in standing tall, but in standing true. And as for Eli Carter, he never sought recognition, only purpose. He once lost everything because of a signature. Now he'd gained it all back because of forgiveness. If you believe in kindness, forgiveness, and second chances, then remember this: sometimes the people we overlook carry the greatest stories of redemption. Because the ones who clean the floors of our success may be the very souls who sweep us clean again. The string quartet played softly in the background, a gentle hum of violins brushing against the clink of crystal glasses. Laughter rippled through the air, thin, rehearsed, the kind of laughter that never quite reached the eyes. Clara Winslow sat at her place near the center of the ballroom, her wheelchair gleaming under the chandelier's fractured light. Her face was the picture of composure, elegance sculpted by discipline, every movement measured, every smile perfectly timed. She lifted her glass to her lips, and that's when it happened. A waiter, no older than 20, nervous and unsteady under the weight of his silver tray, tripped on the edge of the carpet. The tray tilted. A crystal flute of champagne tipped forward and golden liquid cascaded down, spattering across the polished floor near Clara's chair. The sound of it, that soft, shimmering spill, snapped through the air louder than any shout. Clara flinched. The crowd turned. And in that brief, suspended moment, it felt as if every eye in the room was waiting to see whether she'd break. But before the young waiter could stammer an apology, a figure moved quickly from the corner, Eli Carter. He crossed the ballroom with quiet precision, his faded blue uniform cutting through the sea of tuxedos and gowns. Without a word, he knelt beside her, his hand steady as he pressed a towel to the spill. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said softly. His voice wasn't hurried or fearful, it was calm, gentle, like he had spent a lifetime learning how to handle what others had dropped. Clara blinked, surprised not by his apology but by the way he said it, as if he was sorry not just for the spill, but for something much deeper, something the world had done to both of them. She smiled faintly, a small fragile curve of the lip that even she hadn't expected to form. Eli looked up for a moment, their eyes meeting. There was no pity there, no awkwardness, only understanding. Then, just as quickly, he lowered his gaze again, wrung out the towel, and disappeared back into the blur of movement and music. Days became weeks. The gala passed. The headlines praised the event, the decor, the guest list. Everything except the woman who made it possible. But Clara remembered only that small moment. The quiet steadiness of Eli's hands. The soft tone of his voice. Over the next few weeks, she began to notice him more often. In the early hours before dawn, when she arrived at the office tower before anyone else, she'd see him mopping the marble in the lobby, the rhythm of his strokes almost meditative. Sometimes he'd be fixing a light fixture, his sleeves rolled up, revealing the faded scars of labor. Other times he'd be polishing the brass rails, pausing every now and then to glance out the massive glass windows that framed the city skyline like a dream, too far away to touch. Clara often lingered near the elevators, pretending to check her phone, watching him from the corner of her eye. He moved differently from everyone else. While others rushed, Eli flowed, as though every step, every motion was a quiet rebellion against chaos. There was something in his eyes, too. A stillness, a sorrow, a depth that reminded her of the nights she spent staring at her reflection, wondering where her old self had gone. She wanted to speak to him, to ask who he was before this, to ask why his silence felt like her own. But she didn't, because compassion to her had become dangerous. The breaking point that afternoon, the boardroom was a battlefield, a long mahogany table, 12 executives, and Clara at the head, the woman who had built the empire they were now tearing apart. The company's newest product launch had failed. Sales were down. Investors were restless. The room was thick with tension, with voices raised and egos flaring. Charts, graphs, projections all pointed in the same direction. Disappointment. Clara listened in silence. She tried to hold her posture, back straight, face composed, but inside she felt the slow burn of exhaustion. And then it came. The moment that would undo her calm. Ronald Pierce, senior director, silver hair, sharp suit, sharper tongue, slammed his hand on the table. "Maybe the problem isn't the product," he snapped. "Maybe the problem is leadership. Maybe we need someone who can stand up for this company." The words hung in the air like venom. No one moved. No one breathed. Ronald's face paled as the weight of what he'd said hit him a heartbeat too late. I didn't mean," he started, but Clara had already looked away. Her chest tightened, a pulse of heat rising behind her eyes. She excused herself, voice trembling only slightly. "Continue without me," she whispered, and turned her wheelchair toward the door. The sound of it, the soft whir of wheels on the marble floor, was the loudest thing in the room. The descent. She didn't stop at her office, didn't stop at the elevator lobby. She just kept going and down, down, past the levels of glass and power, past the glossy conference floors and designer corridors filled with people who smiled with their mouths and not their hearts. When the elevator doors opened onto the maintenance level, the air changed. It smelled of detergent and metal. Dim light flickered across the concrete. Here the silence was honest. No pretenses. No titles. And there, mopping the floor near the loading dock, was Eli. He looked up as soon as he heard the elevator hum, his brow furrowed in concern, but his voice was calm when he spoke. "Rough day?" he asked quietly. It was the gentlest question anyone had asked her in months. Clara froze. She wanted to say no, to keep her mask intact, but something about his tone, the soft patience in it, made her chest crack open. She wheeled closer. And before she knew it, the words began to pour out of her. Everything. The accident. The pain, the loneliness, the endless pressure to appear unshakable. The pity disguised as respect. The boardroom full of men who measured her worth by her legs instead of her mind. Eli said nothing. He just listened. Really listened. The kind of listening that makes silence feel like shelter. When she finally stopped, when her voice trembled into stillness, Eli wrung out his mop, set it against the wall, and looked at her with eyes that seemed to see. Through the years, you don't have to stand to rise again, he said softly. Clara felt the words settle. Inside her, like sunlight finding the floor of a darkened room, no one had ever said something so simple, so true, so free of pity. She wanted to answer, but her throat closed. Instead, she just nodded. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was falling apart. She felt like she was being seen. That night, as she sat by the window of her penthouse office, the city lights flickering like constellations below, Clara replayed his words again and again. You don't have to stand to rise again. And in that quiet repetition, something shifted. Not all at once, but like dawn beginning to touch the edges of night. Because maybe, just maybe, rising had nothing to do with standing at all. For the first time in years, Clara Winslow felt seen. Not as the CEO who ruled from glass towers, not as the symbol of resilience the media adored, but as a person. A woman with warmth, with cracks, with quiet laughter returning to her lips. It began in small ways. A shared coffee on a Tuesday morning. The faint scent of detergent on Eli's sleeves as they stood near the staff lounge window, talking about the weather, the city, the strange beauty of people who kept moving no matter how broken the world made them. Clara laughed again, softly at first, as if rediscovering how sound could feel like healing. Eli had that effect. He never tried to impress or flatter. He spoke in gentle truths, each word carrying weight like it had lived 100 lives before leaving his lips. He noticed things no one else did. A tired assistant who stayed too late, a janitor missing a glove, a crack in the wall no one cared to fix, and Clara began noticing them too. The empire she had once ruled with an iron will slowly began to soften. She held meetings where she asked how people felt, a word she hadn't used in years. She sent flowers to an employee's hospital room. She doubled the company's support fund. Her empire began to breathe again, not through profits, but through compassion. And somehow Eli's quiet wisdom had become the pulse of that change. Still, there was something about him, a shadow he carried behind the calm. Whenever she asked about his past, he'd smile faintly and say, "Nothing worth telling. Just trying to make things right." His words lingered, like a line from a book missing its ending. The night of the Galath city was alight that evening. Cameras flashed across velvet ropes, and the grand ballroom once again filled with power and perfume. Winslow Dynamics was celebrating its 20-year anniversary. And Clara, draped in silver silk, her hair swept back, looked every bit the untouchable icon the world believed her to be. Yet beneath the layers of elegance, her heart beat quietly, steadying itself against the rhythm of memory. She caught a glimpse of Eli earlier that night, working the lower floors, checking on the staff, his posture humble but his eyes soft when they met hers for just a moment. He gave a small nod. She returned it. That was enough, for a while. Then, as the clock neared midnight, a murmur spread through the hall. Security officers whispered into their earpieces, moving with sudden urgency toward the back corridors. A guard leaned close to Clara and murmured, "Ma'am, there's been an incident near the vault storage. Possible theft." Her pulse stumbled. "Theft?" she repeated. The guard nodded. "A man was found inside the restricted section. We're detaining him now." The music faltered. Whispers rippled like smoke across the ballroom. Clara's mind raced, not with suspicion but disbelief, a sinking feeling in her chest she couldn't name. "Who?" she asked quietly. The guard hesitated. "Eli Carter." The name hit her like a physical blow. Her breath caught. Her fingers curled around the arms of her chair. "Take me there," she whispered. The confrontation. The corridor to the vault was long and dim, lined with old portraits and echoes of footsteps. When she arrived, the air was tense, electric with confusion. Security guards surrounded a single figure, Eli, standing still, his mop forgotten. a small velvet box clutched in his hand. He didn't resist, didn't speak, just stood there beneath the cold fluorescent light, his shoulders lowered, his eyes carrying more sorrow than fear. Clara's voice trembled. "Eli?" He turned slowly, meeting her gaze. In that moment, the world seemed to fall away. The guards, the noise, the sterile light. And all that remained was the unbearable question between them. "Why?" She whispered, her voice broke. "After everything, why?" Eli looked at her, his jaw trembling as if each word would cost him something sacred. "Because it belonged to you," he said softly. He opened the velvet box. Inside, under the dim light, was a delicate gold locket, aged, scratched, but unmistakable. Clara's breath left her in a gasp. Her mother's locket, the one she had worn on the night of the accident. The one she thought had been lost forever amid twisted metal and fire. Her vision blurred, her mind reeled. "I found it," Eli said, his voice barely holding steady. "At the site of your accident." The room erupted. Whispers, confusion, disbelief. The guards shifted uncertainly, but Clara could only stare at the locket, at the past resurrected in his hands. "You were there?" she asked, her voice shaking. Eli nodded slowly. "I was the first one who reached your car," he said. "I pulled you out before it exploded. You were unconscious, bleeding. I tried to keep you awake until help came. You kept asking for your mother." Her throat tightened, her vision blurred with tears. She remembered flashes, heat, smoke, the sound of rain against metal. "I tried to visit you in the hospital," he continued, "but the doctors said no visitors. Your family kept the press away, and I—" He hesitated, his eyes dark with shame. "I couldn't show my face anyway." Clara frowned. "What do you mean?" Eli swallowed hard. His next words cracked the silence open like thunder. "Because I wasn't supposed to be there. I was working a delivery job that night. I was behind schedule, driving too fast on that same road." He took a step forward. His voice broke. "It was my truck that hit you." The air vanished. Gasps rippled through the room. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Clara froze. Her mind went white, her pulse roaring in her ears. Her hands gripped her wheelchair so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "You," she whispered, barely breathing. "You did this to me?" Eli nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Yes," he whispered, "and I've never stopped paying for it." The guards moved closer, but Clara raised a trembling hand. "Wait." Her eyes locked on his. The same eyes that had once brought her peace, now confessing the very pain she'd spent years trying to bury. Eli's voice cracked open like a confession meant for heaven, not men. "I wanted to die that night too. When I saw what I'd done, when I saw you, broken, bleeding, still fighting to move, I swore I'd spend my life making it right. Every breath since that night has been for that promise." He looked down at the locket, his hands trembling. "That's why I took this job, why I stayed close. Not to hide, but to make sure you were okay, to protect you, even if it meant living in the shadows of my mistake." Tears filled his eyes, but he didn't wipe them away. "I never expected forgiveness," he said softly. "I just needed to be near enough to keep you safe." The room was silent. The crowd that had gathered watched, motionless, witnesses to a truth too human to fit neatly into guilt or grace. Clara's world spun. Anger and heartbreak tangled in her chest like wild vines. Every scar, every sleepless night, every ounce of pain, now had a face. And yet, that face was also the one who had listened to her, healed her, reminded her how to feel again. Her voice trembled. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you deserved peace," he said quietly. "And I didn't." A tear rolled down her cheek, slow and heavy as the moment itself. The chandeliers above flickered, casting shadows like ghosts of the past across their faces. In that haunting silence, forgiveness and fury collided, and something new, fragile and sacred began to form between them. The same employees who once mocked him, who whispered about the janitor with quiet pity, who laughed behind closed doors at his worn shoes and simple speech, now stood frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. The air in the vault room had grown heavy, thick with disbelief, guilt, and the strange electricity that fills the space right before a heart breaks open. For years, these people had seen Eli as invisible, a background figure, cleaning, fixing, sweeping. Someone meant to fade into corners and echo through the sound of his mop bucket wheels. Now, under the harsh glow of the security lights, he wasn't invisible anymore. He was the center of everything, and the question that haunted every watching face was simple. Who was the villain now? Clara's eyes blurred with tears. Her chest felt tight, as though every breath had to fight its way out. The man standing before her, the one who had shown her quiet kindness when she thought her soul was beyond repair, was the same man who had once taken everything from her in a single, brutal night. The collision of those truths cracked something deep within her. She wanted to scream, to hate him, to demand why fate had been so cruel, why the one person who helped her stand again was the same one who made her fall in the first place. But when she looked at him, really looked, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man shaking, eyes glistening with remorse, hands trembling as though they carried the weight of every wrong he had ever done. He wasn't defending himself. He wasn't running. He stood there bare, broken, asking for nothing but understanding that he might never receive. And in that moment, something inside her began to shift. Years of bitterness, of sleepless nights filled with pain, of waking up to a life she no longer recognized. All of it began to melt, not into joy but into something far rarer. Peace. The peace that doesn't come from justice but from surrender. The kind that doesn't erase the past but releases its grip. She remembered his words, softly spoken weeks ago as they cleaned up after a late company event. You don't have to stand to rise again. She hadn't understood it then. But now, as she stood before him, the man who broke her, the man who saved her, she finally did. Healing wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about rewriting the past. It was about release. The courage to let go of what could never be undone. She took a deep, trembling breath. The room held its breath with her. Her voice, when it came, was soft, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. I forgive you. The words hung in the air like a fragile melody, echoing through the silence, settling over the crowd like falling snow. Eli's knees buckled. He fell to the floor sobbing openly, his hands covering his face as though he wasn't worthy to look at her. You don't owe me that, he whispered through the tears. You don't owe me anything. Clara stepped closer, her eyes glistening. Maybe not, she said gently, but I owe it to myself. And in that moment, the cold corporate walls that had witnessed decades of deals and silence witnessed something far more powerful. Two souls forgiving what life itself had broken. No applause, no music, just quiet tears, and the slow realization that everyone in that room had been changed by what they had seen. Because forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. And that night, Clara Winslow set herself free. The morning. After the next morning, the news spread across the company like wildfire. No one could believe it. Clara Winslow, the iron-willed CEO known for her ruthless precision, had done something no one expected. She didn't fire Eli. She didn't press charges. She promoted him, not as a janitor, but as the new head of Employee Relations, the man responsible for rebuilding compassion, empathy, and integrity within the company's culture. When the press gathered for her statement, she stood at the podium with calm strength, her voice steady, her eyes clear. Sometimes, she began, the people who clean our floors are the same people who help us clean our souls. The crowd went silent. Flashbulbs flickered like lightning. Reporters stopped writing for a moment, simply listening. This company, she continued, was built on ambition. But along the way, we forgot the one thing that makes ambition meaningful: humanity. She paused, glancing toward Eli, who stood off to the side, his uniform replaced by a crisp white shirt, eyes red but shining. Eli reminded me that success means nothing if it costs us our compassion, she said. And forgiveness isn't a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. Because sometimes the greatest power you can ever hold is the power to let go. Applause filled the hall, hesitant at first, then rising like a wave. And for the first time in years, Clara didn't feel like a CEO. She felt like a human being, whole, unburdened, alive. Epilogue. That night, as the sun set over the city skyline, Clara stood by her office window, watching the light fade across the glass towers she once ruled. Below, in the courtyard, she saw Eli speaking with a group of employees, listening, smiling, his hands moving gently as he spoke. No one avoided him anymore. No one whispered. They listened. And she smiled. Not the smile of victory, but of peace. Because forgiveness had not erased what happened. It had transformed it. It had turned pain into purpose. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that forgiveness can rebuild even the deepest wounds, please like, share, and subscribe to Kind Heart Stories, where tales of courage, compassion, and redemption come alive every day. Before you go, tell us in the comments, do you believe everyone deserves a second chance? Because sometimes the most broken hearts create the strongest souls.
Lily Palmer stood outside Thompson's auto repair, clutching her phone and trying to convince herself this was a terrible idea. At 26, she should have better solutions to her problems than what she was about to do. But desperation makes people creative, and Lily was definitely desperate. Her family reunion was tomorrow. The reunion she'd been dreading for 6 months, ever since her cousin Jessica had announced her engagement to a successful doctor. Jessica, who never missed an opportunity to remind everyone that Lily was still single, still working at a flower shop, still figuring out her life. Lily had made a mistake 3 months ago. In a moment of weakness at her grandmother's birthday party, when Jessica had made one too many comments about Lily's perpetually single status, she'd lied. She'd invented a boyfriend, someone wonderful and successful who was just too busy to attend family events. The lie had grown with each phone call from her mother. Each detail added to make the story believable. And now the reunion was tomorrow. And her imaginary boyfriend needed to become real for just one day. She pushed open the door to the auto shop, the smell of motor oil and rubber hitting her immediately. The shop was cluttered, but organized in the way that suggested someone who knew exactly where everything was. Sunlight streamed through the large bay windows, catching dust motes in golden shafts of light. A man emerged from beneath a vintage car, wiping his hands on a rag. Lily's breath caught. She'd been expecting someone older, gruff, maybe with a beer belly and grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. Instead, she found herself looking at someone close to her age, maybe early 30s, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead and striking eyes that held her attention a moment too long. He wore a simple gray t-shirt that suggested he spent time doing physical work, jeans worn soft with use, and work boots that had clearly seen better days. There was something almost magnetic about him, a quiet confidence that filled the space. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice warm and genuinely friendly. "I hope so," Lily said, then immediately wanted to take the words back. This was insane. She should leave, come up with a better plan, maybe just admit to her family that she'd lied. "Car trouble?" he prompted when she didn't continue. "No. Actually, my car's fine. This is about something else entirely, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy." He smiled, and it transformed his face. "I meet a lot of interesting people in this job. Try me." Lily took a deep breath. "Just say it. The worst he can do is say no. Can you pretend to be my boyfriend for a day?" The words hung in the air between them. The man's expression shifted from friendly to surprised to something that might have been amused. "That's a new one," he said finally. "And here I thought this was going to be about needing an oil change." "I know how it sounds. I do. But I'm desperate, and you're going to think I'm absolutely pathetic when I explain why? Why don't you start with your name?" "Lily. Lily Palmer." "All right, Lily Palmer. I'm Daniel, and I have to admit you've got my attention. Why don't you tell me what's going on?" There was something about the way he said it, without judgment, with genuine curiosity, that made Lily's carefully constructed walls come tumbling down. She told him everything. The family reunion, her cousin Jessica, the lie that had spiraled out of control, the mounting pressure from her family, the humiliation she'd face tomorrow when she showed up alone. "I know it's ridiculous," she finished. "I should just tell them the truth. But my grandmother's going to be there, and she's 87, and all she talks about is wanting to see me happy before she dies. And my mother keeps saying how proud she is that I finally found someone. And I just can't face the disappointment in their eyes when they realize I made it all up." Daniel had been listening intently, leaning against his workbench, arms crossed but posture open. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "What would this entail exactly?" "Tomorrow afternoon, 2 to 6, family reunion at my aunt's house. You just have to act like we've been dating for 3 months. Be polite, answer basic questions, maybe hold my hand a few times. I'll pay you, obviously. I have $300 saved up. I know it's not much, but I don't want your money," Daniel said, cutting her off. Lily's heart sank. Of course he wouldn't do it. This was a crazy request from a stranger. What had she been thinking? "But I'll do it," he continued. "What?" "I'll pretend to be your boyfriend. No charge. On one condition." "Anything?" "You bring flowers. Nice ones, since you work at a flower shop. For your grandmother. And you stop apologizing for being human. We all make mistakes. We all get backed into corners sometimes. There's no shame in asking for help." Lily felt tears prick her eyes. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Daniel shrugged, but there was depth in his expression. "Maybe I know what it's like to feel like you don't measure up to family expectations. Maybe I think life's too short to let people make you feel small. Or maybe I just like the idea of helping someone have a good day. Does the reason matter? I guess not. Thank you. Really, thank you. Give me your number. I'll pick you up tomorrow at 1:30. And Lily, wear something that makes you feel confident. Not what you think they want to see. What makes you feel like yourself." The next day, Lily stood in front of her closet for 20 minutes. Her instinct was to choose something conservative, something that screamed responsible adult with her life together. Instead, she remembered Daniel's words. She chose a floral dress she'd bought on impulse months ago, but never worn, thinking it was too cheerful, too much like herself. When the doorbell rang at exactly 1:30, her heart was pounding. This was it. Either this would work, or it would be a disaster of epic proportions. She opened the door and almost didn't recognize him. Daniel stood there in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, casual but put together. His hair was styled, though still with that slight fall over his forehead that made him look approachable. He cleaned up remarkably well, but it was more than that. He looked comfortable in his own skin, confident without being arrogant. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and the way he said it made her believe he meant it. "You clean up pretty well yourself." "I have my moments." He held out his hand. "Ready to go convince your family we're madly in love?" Lily took his hand, feeling the calluses from working with tools, the strength in his grip. "As ready as I'll ever be." In the car, Daniel asked questions. Not just the basics they'd need to keep their story straight, but real questions. How they met. What their first date was like. What made her laugh. What made her feel alive. They crafted a story together. One that felt real because it was based on who they actually were. "Tell me about the flower shop," Daniel said as they drove. "It's small, on Maple Street. I've been there 4 years. It's not glamorous, but I love it. There's something magical about helping people express feelings they can't put into words. A bouquet for a new baby, an apology, a first date, a funeral. Flowers mark all our important moments. That sounds like more than just a job." "It is. My family doesn't see it that way. They think I'm wasting my potential, that I should have gone into business or law like my cousins." But I don't think loving what you do is settling. It's not, Daniel said firmly. Loving your work is winning. They pulled up to her aunt's house, a sprawling suburban home with cars already lining the street. Lily's stomach churned. Hey, Daniel said softly, taking her hand. We've got this. Just follow my lead, okay? And remember, you're not asking them to accept you. You already are exactly who you're supposed to be. The reunion was in full swing when they walked into the backyard. Lily's mother spotted her immediately, her face lighting up. Then she saw Daniel, and her expression transformed into something Lily had rarely seen. Pride. Lily, sweetheart. Her mother rushed over, pulling her into a hug before turning to Daniel. And you must be Daniel. We've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope, Daniel said with an easy smile, shaking her hand warmly. Lily's been very mysterious about you. We were beginning to think you might be imaginary. Lily felt her face flush, but Daniel just laughed. I know. My work schedule has been brutal, but I couldn't miss today. Family's important, and Lily talks about you all so much. I felt like I needed to finally meet the people who made her who she is. Her mother practically melted. Within minutes, Daniel was being introduced around, shaking hands, making small talk, charming every single person he met. But what struck Lily most was how natural it felt. He wasn't performing. He was genuinely interested in her family, asking her grandmother about her garden, talking to her uncle about his vintage car collection, playing with her young cousins like he'd known them for years. Then Jessica appeared, her engagement ring catching the sunlight, her doctor-fiancé Brandon in tow. Lily, Jessica said with her trademark smile that never quite reached her eyes. So this is the mysterious boyfriend. I was starting to think you'd made him up. Jessica, Lily said, forcing herself to smile. This is Daniel. Daniel, my cousin Jessica and her fiancé Brandon. Congratulations on your engagement, Daniel said smoothly. Lily mentioned you're marrying a doctor. That's impressive. Brandon puffed up slightly. Emergency medicine. Long hours but rewarding. And what do you do, Daniel? Here it was. The moment where their story would crumble. Lily had told her family Daniel was in business, vague enough to be believable, but she hadn't prepared for direct questions. I own a business, Daniel said easily. Started from the ground up about 8 years ago. It's been a lot of work, but I love what I do. What kind of business? Jessica pressed, clearly fishing for something to diminish. Auto repair and restoration. Classic cars, mainly. It's not glamorous, but there's something satisfying about taking something broken and making it beautiful again. Lily's heart sank. An auto mechanic. Jessica was going to have a field day with this. But before Jessica could respond, Lily's grandmother appeared, moving slowly but with purpose. Daniel, she said, and everyone quieted. I want to see this young man who's made my Lily smile again. Daniel knelt slightly so he was at her grandmother's eye level. Mrs. Palmer, Lily brought you these. He gestured to the elaborate bouquet Lily had created that morning. Pink peonies and roses in full bloom. Her grandmother's eyes misted. Peonies, my favorite. Lily remembered. She talks about you all the time, Daniel said gently. Says you taught her to see the beauty in simple things. That's a gift. Her grandmother studied him for a long moment, then patted his cheek. You're a good man. I can see it. Don't let this family intimidate you with their fancy careers and big houses. Character matters more than resumes. Yes, ma'am. I couldn't agree more. The afternoon unfolded in a way Lily hadn't expected. Yes, there were awkward moments. Yes, Jessica made a few pointed comments about the differences between doctors and mechanics. But Daniel handled everything with grace and quiet confidence. He didn't try to prove himself or compete. He simply was himself, and somehow that was enough. At one point, Lily's mother pulled her aside. He's wonderful, she said quietly. Really, Lily? I haven't seen you this happy in years. Guilt twisted in Lily's stomach. Mom, I don't care what he does for a living. I care that he looks at you like you're the most important person in the room. That's rare, sweetheart. As the reunion wound down and the golden light of late afternoon filled the yard, Lily found herself standing with Daniel by the garden. Away from the crowd. Thank you, she said quietly. For today, for being kind to my grandmother, for not making me feel pathetic. "Lily," Daniel said, turning to face her. "There's something I need to tell you." Her stomach dropped. Here it was. The revelation that he thought she was crazy, that this was the weirdest day of his life, that he never wanted to see her again. "I wasn't entirely honest with you," he continued. "About who I am. What do you mean?" "I do own Thompson's Auto Repair." "That part's true, but it's not just one shop. It's 17 shops across 3 states. Thompson's Auto Group. We do about $40 million in revenue annually. I'm the CEO. Lily stared at him, her mind trying to process this information. "You're a CEO?" "My grandfather started the first shop. My dad expanded it. I took over 8 years ago and grew it into something bigger. But I still work in the original shop most days because I love it. I love the smell of motor oil, the problem solving, the satisfaction of fixing things. The business side is necessary, but the shop floor is where I feel most myself." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because when you walked into my shop yesterday, you saw me. Not my title, not my bank account, not what I could do for you, just me. And when your cousin asked what I did, I could have told her I'm a CEO. Could have watched her expression change, watched the respect appear that wasn't there before. But I didn't want that. I wanted to see who would judge me for being a mechanic and who would see past the label. Your grandmother passed the test, by the way. So did you." Lily felt something shift inside her. "I don't understand. Why would someone like you agree to this crazy scheme?" Daniel smiled. "Because a brave woman walked into my shop and asked for help. Because I know what it's like to feel like you have to be something you're not to make your family proud. And maybe because I've been looking for someone who sees me for who I am, not what I have. Someone who brings flowers to her grandmother and works in a flower shop because it makes her happy, even when everyone tells her she should want more." "This day was supposed to be fake," Lily whispered. "I know. But somewhere between your grandmother's garden and watching you laugh with your cousins, between the flower shop stories and the way you refuse to apologize for being yourself, it stopped feeling fake to me." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying maybe we could try this for real. No pretending. Just 2 people who met in the strangest way possible, getting to know each other. What do you think?" Lily looked at this man who'd pretended to be her boyfriend and somehow shown her what a real partner could look like. Someone who saw her, valued her, didn't need her to be anything other than exactly who she was. "I think I'd like that," she said. "But fair warning, my family's going to be impossible now. They're going to plan our wedding before our second date. Let them plan. We'll move at our own pace. Deal? Deal." 6 months later, they were still taking things slow, but Lily had never been happier. She'd learned that Daniel really did work at his original shop most days, that he lived in a modest apartment despite being able to afford much more, that he donated most of his wealth to programs that helped young people learn trades. And when they finally told her family the truth about how they met, her grandmother laughed until she cried. "Only you, Lily," she said, "could find true love by asking a stranger to be your fake boyfriend. Sometimes the most honest things start with a lie." A year later, when Daniel proposed in the flower shop where Lily worked, surrounded by blooms in every color, she said yes without hesitation. Not because he was a CEO or because he'd saved her from family embarrassment, but because he'd seen her completely and loved her anyway. Because sometimes the best relationships start in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes pretending to be something can help you discover what's real. And sometimes the person you need is working in an auto shop, waiting for someone brave enough to ask for help. All you have to do is walk through the door. If this story reminded you that authenticity matters more than appearances, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected love and second chances. Comment below about a time you took a chance on something that seemed crazy but turned out to be exactly right. Sometimes the best things in life start with a leap of faith.
Harrison caught his maid red-handed, stuffing his expensive belongings into her bag. For weeks, he'd been missing items, jewelry, even family heirlooms. But when this billionaire decided to follow her to expose the truth, what he discovered didn't just break his heart, it shattered everything he thought he knew about the woman who worked in his home. And by the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the people we judge the harshest are actually the ones with the purest hearts. But first, let me tell you about Harrison Cole, a man who had everything money could buy, but was about to learn that true wealth has nothing to do with what you own. If you're ready for a story that will completely change how you see the world, smash that like button right now and trust me, you'll want to stick around for the twist at the 25-minute mark that will have you questioning everything. Harrison was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. Tall, sharp-featured, with silver-gray hair that made him look distinguished rather than old, his steel blue eyes had negotiated billion-dollar deals and stared down corporate titans. He wore custom-tailored suits that cost more than most people's cars, and his reputation for ruthless business acumen was legendary. But success came at a price. Every morning, Harrison would wake up in his king-sized bed, alone. He'd eat breakfast at a dining table built for 12, alone. He'd work from his home office overlooking Central Park, completely alone. The mansion that was supposed to be his sanctuary had become his prison. 30 rooms filled with expensive furniture that no one sat on, art that no one discussed, and memories that belonged to someone else entirely. You see, Harrison had inherited this house from his late parents, along with most of his wealth. The paintings, the sculptures, the antique jewelry, they were family heirlooms passed down through generations of Coles. But to Harrison, they felt more like museum pieces than personal treasures. The only human contact he had came from his small staff, a chef who came twice a week, a driver on standby, and his housekeeper. And that's where our story really begins, with Bonnie Bennett. Bonnie was 28 years old, with dark auburn hair always pulled back in a neat bun and green eyes that seemed to hold secrets. She stood barely 5 feet tall, with calloused hands that spoke of a lifetime of hard work and a voice so soft you had to lean in to hear her. She'd been working for Harrison for 8 months, arriving every morning at exactly 6 a.m. through the service entrance. She'd change into her crisp uniform and begin what seemed like an invisible dance through his home. Bonnie moved through the mansion like a ghost. Efficient, thorough, almost silent. She'd dust every surface to perfection, organize every room with military precision, and handle Harrison's precious belongings with a care that impressed even him. But here's what struck Harrison as odd. Despite her obvious competence, Bonnie never seemed comfortable around the expensive items in his home. When she cleaned his rare art collection, her hands would shake slightly. When she organized his jewelry, she'd work quickly, as if touching the pieces made her nervous. And she never, ever made eye contact when he tried to speak with her. Harrison's first suspicion began 3 months into Bonnie's employment. He'd noticed that a vintage Rolex, one of several he kept in his bedroom dresser, was missing. Not stolen necessarily, just not where he remembered leaving it. Probably just misplaced it, he told himself. He had so many watches, so many possessions, it was easy to lose track. But then other things started disappearing. A pair of diamond cufflinks that had belonged to his grandfather. Gone. A rare gold coin from his collection. Missing. Each incident was small enough to dismiss. Maybe he'd moved the items himself and forgotten. Maybe he'd spent the cash and not remembered. Maybe he was just getting paranoid in his old age. But then came the morning that changed everything. It was a Tuesday in late October. Harrison had been working in his home office when he realized he'd left his reading glasses in the bedroom. As he walked toward his room, he heard sounds coming from inside. Soft rustling. The gentle clink of metal against metal. Harrison approached his bedroom door, which was slightly ajar, and peered through the crack. What he saw made his blood run cold. Bonnie was standing at his dresser, carefully wrapping something in a small cloth before placing it in her cleaning supply bag. From his angle, Harrison couldn't see exactly what she was wrapping, but he could see enough. She was taking something small and valuable, judging by how carefully she was handling it. Harrison's heart pounded as he watched his trusted housekeeper, the woman he'd allowed into every corner of his private space, carefully close her bag and continue cleaning as if nothing had happened. Now I want you to pause and think about this. You've just caught someone you trusted red-handed. What would you do? Confront them immediately? Call the police? Or would you try to gather more evidence first? Let me know in the comments, because Harrison's decision in this moment set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. That night, Harrison couldn't sleep. He kept replaying the scene in his mind, trying to make sense of what he'd witnessed. Bonnie had seemed so trustworthy, quiet, respectful, incredibly hardworking. She'd never asked for anything extra, never seemed interested in his wealth or possessions. If anything, she'd seemed almost uncomfortable around his expensive belongings. But the evidence was right there. He'd seen her with his own eyes. The next morning, Harrison decided to test his suspicions. Before Bonnie arrived, he strategically placed items around his bedroom and office. A gold pen here, some cash there, a small antique clock on his nightstand. Nothing too obvious, but things that would be easy to pocket and valuable enough to be worth stealing. Then he watched. Not directly. He wasn't about to hide in closets like some paranoid old man. But he made excuses to walk past his bedroom throughout the day, checking on the items he'd placed. By evening, the antique clock was gone. Harrison felt sick. Not just angry, genuinely ill. He'd started to trust Bonnie, had even begun to look forward to her quiet presence in his lonely house. To discover that she'd been systematically stealing from him felt like a physical blow. But what hurt most was the betrayal of trust. In his business world, Harrison expected deception. He'd planned for it, protected against it, even admired it when it was particularly clever. But in his home? In his private sanctuary? From someone he'd begun to think of as, well, if not a friend, then at least a trusted employee? That night, Harrison made a decision that would change both their lives forever. He was going to follow Bonnie after work and find out exactly what she was doing with his belongings. Was she selling them? Did she have a fence? Was this part of some larger operation? One way or another, he was going to get answers. The next few days were torture for Harrison. Every morning, he'd watch Bonnie arrive and go about her work, knowing what he knew, seeing her differently. Where he once saw careful attention to detail, he now saw someone casing his belongings. Where he once appreciated her thoroughness, he now wondered what else she might be planning to take. Where he once found her quietness respectful, he now heard the silence of someone with something to hide. Harrison started keeping a mental inventory of his possessions. He'd make note of where he left things, then check later to see if they'd been moved or were missing entirely. The pattern became clear quickly. Small items, always valuable, but never anything so significant that its absence would be immediately obvious. A silver letter opener from his desk. A vintage fountain pen. Another $20 from his wallet. Bonnie was smart about it. She never took too much at once, never targeted the same area twice in a row. If Harrison hadn't been specifically watching for it, he might never have noticed. But he was watching, and the evidence was mounting. What confused Harrison most was Bonnie's behavior during these thefts. When he managed to catch glimpses of her taking items, she didn't look like a criminal. She looked sad. Her hands would shake as she wrapped each piece carefully in cloth. Her movements were quick and nervous, as if she hated what she was doing. More than once, Harrison saw her pause while holding one of his belongings, staring at it with what looked like genuine remorse before placing it in her bag. This wasn't the behavior of a hardened thief. This was someone who seemed to be stealing against her own moral instincts. But why? Harrison's business mind went into overdrive, analyzing possibilities. Maybe Bonnie had gambling debts. Maybe she was being blackmailed. Maybe she had a drug problem she was hiding. Maybe she was supporting someone else who was in trouble. None of these explanations felt right, though. Bonnie didn't show any signs of addiction or desperation. She was always punctual, always professional, always seemed healthy and alert. The mystery consumed Harrison's thoughts. During board meetings, he'd find himself wondering about Bonnie's motivations. During conference calls, he'd catch his mind wandering to questions about her personal life. His business partners started noticing his distraction. "Harrison, you seem a million miles away," his CFO mentioned during a crucial acquisition discussion. "Everything all right?" "Fine," Harrison replied automatically, but his mind was elsewhere. Why is she stealing from me? 2 weeks after Harrison first witnessed Bonnie taking his belongings, he made a decision that surprised even him. He was going to follow her. Not to catch her in the act of selling his items. He already had enough evidence of the thefts. He wanted to understand the why behind her actions. He wanted to see where she went, what she did with his belongings, who else might be involved. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a desire for closure. Maybe it was the businessman in him needing to understand the full scope of the operation he'd uncovered. Or maybe, despite everything, there was still a part of him that hoped there was an explanation that would make sense of the quiet, conscientious woman he'd thought he knew. Friday evening arrived with an early winter chill. Harrison positioned himself in his home office, watching through the window as Bonnie completed her usual end-of-day routine. At exactly 6 p.m., she emerged from the service entrance, her large black bag slung over her shoulder, the same bag Harrison now knew contained his stolen belongings. Harrison's heart pounded as he watched her walk down his circular driveway. This was it. Tonight, he would finally get answers. "James," he called to his driver, trying to keep his voice steady. "Get the car." "Where to, Mr. Cole?" Harrison paused, looking out at Bonnie's retreating figure. What was he doing? Following his employee like some private detective? This felt insane, but the need to know the truth overwhelmed his doubts. "Just follow that woman," he said, pointing toward Bonnie. "The one who just left. Keep your distance, but don't lose her." James raised an eyebrow but didn't question his boss. Within minutes, they were trailing Bonnie through the streets of Manhattan in Harrison's discreet black sedan. The journey started in familiar territory. Bonnie walked past the upscale shops that lined Harrison's neighborhood. Jewelry stores displaying pieces worth more than most people's annual salaries. Art galleries showcasing works by masters. Restaurants where a single meal could cost a week's wages. Harrison watched her navigate this world of wealth with a strange mix of familiarity and discomfort. She knew these streets well. She'd been walking them twice a day for months, but she moved through them like someone who didn't belong. "Where is she going?" Harrison muttered, more to himself than to James. As they followed Bonnie deeper into the city, the scenery began to change dramatically. Block by block, the gleaming storefronts gave way to older, shabbier buildings. The well-dressed pedestrians disappeared. The perfect sidewalks developed cracks, and the pristine storefronts were replaced by businesses with hand-painted signs and security gates. This was a part of New York that Harrison's wealth had made invisible to him. He'd lived in Manhattan his entire life, but he'd never seen neighborhoods like this, places where people clearly struggled to get by, where every dollar mattered, where survival was a daily concern rather than success and luxury. After 45 minutes of walking, Bonnie finally stopped. She stood in front of a narrow 3-story building that looked like it had been built decades ago and hadn't been properly maintained since. The brick facade was cracked and stained, several windows were boarded up, and the small front steps were crumbling. But what caught Harrison's attention wasn't the building's condition. It was the small, faded sign hanging crooked beside the front door. St. Catherine's Children's Home. "Pull over across the street," Harrison instructed James, his voice barely above a whisper. Through the car's tinted windows, Harrison watched as Bonnie approached the building's front door. She didn't knock. Instead, she pulled out a key, she had a key, and let herself in. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, lights began flickering on in the windows. And that's when Harrison heard something that made his heart stop. Children's voices. Excited, happy voices calling out, "Miss Bonnie! Miss Bonnie's here!" Harrison had followed his maid, expecting to catch her selling his stolen goods to some fence or criminal contact. But what he was about to witness inside that rundown children's home would shatter every assumption he'd made about Bonnie, about his missing belongings, and about what it really means to be wealthy. The truth was so heartbreaking, so beautiful, that it would change both their lives forever. Harrison sat frozen in his car, staring at the children's home as the sounds of excitement and joy filtered through the old building's walls. What was Bonnie doing in a children's home? Why did she have a key? And why were the children so obviously thrilled to see her? Through the dusty, cracked windows, Harrison began to make out shapes and movements inside. Small figures, children of various ages, gathered around a taller figure that could only be Bonnie. "Mr. Cole?" James asked quietly. "Should we?" "Wait," Harrison said, his voice barely a whisper. "Just wait." What Harrison witnessed over the next 2 hours would haunt him for the rest of his life. Through those grimy windows, Harrison watched Bonnie transform into someone completely different from the quiet, nervous woman who cleaned his house. She was animated, smiling, laughing. Children clustered around her as she opened her large black bag, the same bag Harrison knew contained his stolen belongings. But as he watched her unpack the bag's contents, Harrison's understanding of everything began to crumble. The first item Bonnie pulled out was the vintage Rolex that had gone missing weeks ago. But instead of selling it or keeping it for herself, she handed it to an older boy, maybe 16 or 17, who examined it with wonder. Harrison leaned forward, pressing his face against the car window. What was happening? The boy carefully wound the watch and held it up to his ear, his face lighting up with joy at the sound of its mechanism. Bonnie spoke to him for several minutes, pointing to different parts of the watch, explaining something that made the boy nod eagerly. Then, to Harrison's shock, the boy handed the watch back to Bonnie, who carefully wrapped it in cloth and placed it back in her bag. Next came the gold coin from Harrison's collection. Bonnie showed it to a group of younger children, who passed it around carefully, examining its engravings and weight. Again, she seemed to be teaching them something, about history, maybe, or craftsmanship. And again, when the lesson was over, the coin went back into her bag. The diamond cufflinks followed the same pattern. Bonnie used them to teach the children about gemstones, about quality, about how fine jewelry was made. The children listened with rapt attention, asking questions that made Bonnie smile and explain more. Harrison's hands were shaking as understanding began to dawn. Bonnie wasn't stealing his belongings to sell them. She was borrowing them to teach the children. But the revelation that truly broke Harrison's heart came when Bonnie pulled out some cash from the salary she was paid that day. She didn't keep it for herself. Instead, she used it to buy groceries that she'd clearly picked up on her way to the children's home. Sandwiches, fruit, milk. Simple, basic food that she began distributing to eager little hands. Harrison watched as Bonnie made sure every child had enough to eat. She counted heads, divided portions carefully, and only when everyone else was satisfied did she sit down with what little remained for herself, which was almost nothing. The truth hit Harrison like a physical blow to the chest. Bonnie had been taking his belongings, yes, but not to steal them. She was using his expensive items as teaching tools for children who would never otherwise have the chance to see, touch, or learn about such things. The Rolex became a lesson in engineering and craftsmanship. The gold coin became a history lesson about different time periods and cultures. The diamond cufflinks became a science lesson about geology and precious stones. The cash became food for hungry children. Every theft had been an act of education, of sharing, of love. Harrison sat in his car, tears streaming down his face, as he watched Bonnie work with the children. She helped them with homework using books that were falling apart. She bandaged scraped knees and wiped away tears. She read stories with different voices for each character, making the children giggle and clap. As the evening progressed, Harrison began to understand more about the children themselves. These weren't just any children. They were orphans, foster kids, children from broken homes who had nowhere else to go. Some looked like they hadn't had a proper meal in days. Others wore clothes that were too big or too small, clearly hand-me-downs that had seen better days. But when they were with Bonnie, they transformed. They laughed, they learned, they felt safe and loved. Harrison watched a teenage girl show Bonnie a drawing she'd made, beaming with pride when Bonnie praised her work. He saw a small boy with a black eye lean against Bonnie's shoulder while she read to him, finding comfort in her presence. He witnessed Bonnie patiently help a struggling reader sound out words, celebrating each small victory with genuine joy. This wasn't just charitable work. This was love in action. I want you to stop for a moment and really think about this. Harrison thought he was dealing with a thief, but he was actually witnessing someone using his possessions to bring joy and education to children who had nothing. Can you imagine how he must have felt in that moment? If this story is affecting you the way it's affecting me, let me know in the comments below. Around 9 p.m., the evening began to wind down. One by one, the children hugged Bonnie goodbye. Not quick, obligatory hugs, but long, desperate embraces from kids who clearly didn't want to let her go. "See you tomorrow, Miss Bonnie?" asked a little girl with pigtails. "Of course, sweetheart," Bonnie replied, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll always be here." Harrison watched as Bonnie carefully packed his belongings back into her bag, treating each item with the same reverence she showed when cleaning his house. These weren't stolen goods to her. They were precious teaching tools that she was borrowing to enrich these children's lives, and she was set to return them back to where they all came from. As the last child was picked up by a foster parent or left for a group home, Bonnie began cleaning up the children's home with the same meticulous care she showed in Harrison's mansion. She swept floors that hadn't been properly maintained in years. She organized donated books and toys. She made sure the space was ready for the next day's activities. Only when everything was perfect did she finally prepare to leave. Harrison watched Bonnie lock up the children's home and begin her walk back toward his neighborhood. But instead of following her this time, he made a decision that surprised even him. He got out of the car. "Mr. Cole?" James called after him. "Sir, where are you going?" But Harrison was already walking toward the children's home, drawn by emotions he couldn't fully name. He approached the same windows Bonnie had looked through, trying to process what he'd witnessed. The space inside was small and clearly struggling. Mismatched furniture, outdated equipment, walls that needed painting. But it was clean, organized, filled with love. Harrison stood outside that building for nearly an hour, wrestling with feelings he hadn't experienced in decades. Shame for his assumptions about Bonnie. Admiration for her dedication to these children. Guilt for having so much while these children had so little. And something else. Something that surprised him more than anything. Gratitude. Gratitude that his possessions, items that had sat unused in his mansion, gathering dust, were being used to bring joy and learning to children who needed both desperately. As Harrison finally returned to his car, his mind was spinning with questions and realizations. How long had Bonnie been doing this? How had she found these children? Why had she chosen to use his belongings instead of asking for help? And most importantly, what kind of person sacrifices their own reputation, their job security, their peace of mind, all to educate and feed children who aren't even her own? The ride home was silent. Harrison stared out the window, seeing his city with completely different eyes. The wealth and luxury that surrounded his neighborhood now felt excessive, almost obscene, when contrasted with the children's home he just witnessed. By the time they reached his mansion, Harrison had made a decision that would change everything. That night, Harrison lay awake until dawn, replaying everything he'd seen. By morning, he'd made a choice that would transform not just his relationship with Bonnie, but the lives of every child in that rundown building. What he did next restored my faith in humanity, and it's going to restore yours too. When Bonnie arrived for work Monday morning at her usual 6 a.m., she found Harrison waiting in the kitchen, something that had never happened before. "Good morning, Mr. A. Cole," she said quietly, avoiding eye contact as she reached for her cleaning supplies. "Bonnie," Harrison said gently, "we need to talk." Bonnie froze. In her experience, "we need to talk" from an employer was never good news. Her face went pale, and her hands began to tremble. "Did I do something wrong, sir? I'm sorry I didn't inform you before taking your things out, but they've all been returned. Every single one of them. If I offended you, I can work harder. I can stay later. I can." "Bonnie," Harrison interrupted, his voice softer than she'd ever heard it. "Please, sit down." Reluctantly, Bonnie set down her supplies and perched on the edge of one of Harrison's kitchen chairs, looking like she might bolt at any moment. Harrison took a deep breath. There was no easy way to have this conversation. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." Bonnie nodded, still not meeting his eyes. "The children at St. Catherine's home," Harrison said quietly. "Tell me about them." The color completely drained from Bonnie's face. Her breathing became shallow, and tears immediately sprang to her eyes. I don't know what you mean, sir," she whispered. "Bonnie," Harrison said, "I followed you Friday night." The words hit Bonnie like a physical blow. She doubled over, clutching her stomach as if she were in pain, and began crying. Not just tears, but deep, body-shaking sobs that seemed to come from a place of pure terror. "Please don't fire me," she gasped between sobs. "Please, Mr. Cole. I know what I did was wrong. I know I should have asked, but I was so afraid you'd say no, and those children, they have nothing. They know nothing about the world beyond their small lives, and I just wanted to show them something beautiful, something that would make them dream bigger than their circumstances." Harrison felt his heart breaking as he watched this strong, caring woman fall apart in front of him. "Bonnie," he said gently, "I'm not going to fire you." She looked up at him through her tears, confusion replacing fear. You're not?" "No. But I need to understand. Tell me about the children. Tell me about what you've been doing." What followed was the most honest conversation Harrison had had with another human being in years. Through her tears, Bonnie told him everything. About growing up in foster care herself, bouncing from home to home, until she aged out of the system at 18, with nowhere to go and no one to care what happened to her. About finding St. Catherine's home 5 years ago, when she was desperate and hungry, and how the director, Mrs. Patterson, had given her not just a meal but hope for a better life. About how Mrs. Patterson had died suddenly last year, leaving the children's home without funding, without direction, without the love and guidance that had kept it running. "The city wants to close it down," Bonnie explained, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "They say it's not up to code, that there's no money to keep it running. But Mr. Cole, those children, they're me. They're who I was before someone cared enough to help." "So you stepped in," Harrison said quietly. "I couldn't let them end up on the streets. I couldn't let them believe that no one cared about them. So I started going there after work, bringing food when I could afford it, helping with homework. Just being there." Harrison felt a lump forming in his throat. "And my belongings?" Bonnie's face crumpled with shame. "I know it was wrong. I know I had no right. But those children, they've never seen anything beautiful, Mr. Cole. They've never held something valuable, never learned about history or science or art from real examples." She looked up at him with desperate eyes. "I always brought everything back. I never kept anything, never sold anything. I wanted them to see that there was beauty in the world. I wanted them to understand that someone thought they were worth teaching." Harrison was quiet for a long time, processing everything Bonnie had told him. When he finally spoke, his voice was thick with emotion. "Bonnie, do you know what you've done?" She shook her head, clearly expecting the worst. "You've taken objects that were sitting unused in my house, gathering dust, meaning nothing to anyone, and you've used them to bring joy and education to children who needed both desperately. Bonnie looked confused. Sir, you've taken my wealth and made it meaningful. You've given my possessions purpose. You've turned dead objects into living lessons. I'm getting emotional just telling you this part of the story. Can you imagine being Bonnie in that moment, expecting to be fired and punished, only to hear that her employer understood and appreciated what she'd been doing? If this story is touching your heart the way it's touching mine, show some love in the comments below. Harrison stood up and walked to his kitchen counter, where he kept a small notepad for grocery lists and reminders. Bonnie, I want you to help me make a list. A list of what, sir? Everything those children need. Everything the children's home needs. Equipment, supplies, food, books, toys, repairs, renovations, everything. Bonnie stared at him in disbelief. Mr. Cole, I don't understand. I'm going to help, Harrison said simply, but not just with money. I want to be involved. I want to understand. I want to learn what you've been teaching those children. The tears that had been flowing from Bonnie's eyes transformed from tears of fear and shame to tears of pure joy and disbelief. You want to help the children? I want to do more than help them, Bonnie. I want to make sure they never have to worry about having enough food, enough books, enough hope again. That afternoon, Harrison did something he'd never done in his 52 years of life. He canceled every meeting on his calendar. Sir? His assistant asked over the phone. You're supposed to meet with the board about the merger. This could cost millions if... Reschedule everything, Harrison said firmly. I have somewhere more important to be. At 3 p.m., Harrison's black Mercedes pulled up in front of St. Catherine's Children's Home. But this time, he wasn't hiding across the street. This time, he got out, walked up to the front door, and knocked. The door was answered by the same teenage boy Harrison had seen examining his watch through the window. Can I help you? The boy asked, his eyes widening at the sight of Harrison's expensive suit and confident bearing. I'm looking for the children who've been learning about watches and coins and jewelry, Harrison said with a smile. I'm told they're excellent students. The boy's face lit up with recognition and excitement. You're Miss Bonnie's friend, the one who owns all the cool stuff. I suppose I am, Harrison chuckled. May I come in? What followed was the most eye-opening and heartwarming afternoon of Harrison's life. The children who had seemed so distant and foreign when viewed through car windows were revealed to be bright, curious, hungry to learn young people who had simply never been given opportunities to explore the world beyond their limited circumstances. When Bonnie arrived at 6 p.m. for her usual evening session, she stopped dead in the doorway to find Harrison surrounded by children, deep in conversation about the difference between various types of precious metals. Mr. Cole, she said, clearly shocked. What are you doing here? Learning, Harrison said simply, gesturing to the children around him. These kids have been teaching me things about my own possessions that I never knew. Mario stepped forward proudly. Miss Bonnie taught us all about your watch, sir. Did you know that the movement inside is called a perpetual calendar? It can track leap years. Sophia held up her notebook. And your gold coin is from 1887. That was during the Gilded Age, when America was becoming really wealthy for the first time. Tyler tugged on Harrison's sleeve. The diamonds in your cufflinks were probably formed 1 billion years ago, deep in the earth where it was really hot and under lots of pressure. Harrison looked at Bonnie with amazement. They know more about my belongings than I do. That evening, Harrison didn't just watch Bonnie work with the children, he participated. He helped Mario understand the mechanics of his vintage Rolex by taking it apart and explaining each component. He told Sophia stories about his family's history that gave context to the gold coin's era. He showed Tyler how diamonds caught and reflected light, creating the sparkle that made them so prized. But the most powerful moment came when it was time for the children to eat. Harrison watched as Bonnie began distributing the simple meals she'd bought with his stolen cash. Sandwiches, fruit, milk. But this time, Harrison had come prepared. "Actually," he said, pulling out his phone, "I took the liberty of ordering dinner for everyone." Within minutes, delivery drivers began arriving with bags and bags of food from one of Manhattan's finest restaurants. Not just enough for the children, but gourmet meals with enough portions for everyone to eat until they were completely satisfied. The children's faces as they tasted food they'd never dreamed of eating was something Harrison would remember for the rest of his life. But what moved him most was watching Bonnie finally eat a full meal herself. The first time he realized that she'd had enough food since she'd started caring for these children. As the evening wound down and the children began to leave for their various foster homes and group homes, each one stopped to hug both Bonnie and Harrison. "Are you going to come back?" Tyler asked, looking up at Harrison with hopeful eyes. Harrison knelt down to Tyler's level. "Would you like me to?" Tyler nodded vigorously. "Miss Bonnie is always sad when we have to leave. Maybe if you're here too, she won't be so sad." Out of the mouths of babes. Harrison looked over at Bonnie, who was fighting back tears as she said goodbye to each child. He saw the pain in her eyes as she watched them leave, knowing that some would return to difficult situations, uncertain futures, cold and hungry nights. And he made a decision that would change everything. That night, Harrison went home and made a series of phone calls that would transform not just St. Catherine's Children's Home, but the entire lives of every child who walked through its doors. What happened next was so incredible, so life-changing, that it restored my faith in what's possible when someone with resources meets someone with heart. At 6 a.m., just as Bonnie was arriving for work, Harrison was already on the phone with his lawyer. "I need to set up a foundation," he said, "and I need it done today." "Harrison, it's barely dawn. Can't this wait until—" "No, it can't wait. There are children who went to sleep hungry last night who shouldn't have to. There are kids sleeping on floors who deserve real beds. There are brilliant young minds trapped in poverty who deserve every opportunity I can give them. It can't wait." His second call was to his accountant. "I want to transfer $20 million into a charitable foundation account. How quickly can we make that happen?" $20 million, Harrison, that's a significant portion of your liquid assets. Are you sure you want to? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. His third call was to the city's most reputable construction company. "I need a building completely renovated and expanded. Full renovation plus additions. Money is no object, but I need it done fast." "How fast are we talking, Mr. Cole?" "I need you to start today." When Bonnie found Harrison that morning, he wasn't alone. 3 men in suits sat at his dining table, papers spread everywhere, laptops open, phones ringing. "Bonnie," Harrison said, standing up with a smile that transformed his entire face. "I'd like you to meet my lawyer, my accountant, and my contractor. We have something incredible to discuss." Bonnie looked confused and slightly overwhelmed by all the activity. "Mr. Cole, I don't understand." "Sit down," Harrison said gently, guiding her to a chair. "You're about to become the director of the Cole Foundation for Children's Education and Welfare." Over the next 2 hours, Harrison laid out a plan that left Bonnie speechless. The Cole Foundation would be dedicated to supporting disadvantaged children across New York City, starting with a complete transformation of St. Catherine's Children's Home. "We're talking about a full renovation and expansion," Harrison explained, his eyes bright with excitement. "A state-of-the-art kitchen that can serve hot, nutritious meals to 100 children. Individual bedrooms for kids who need them, each with proper beds and personal storage. A computer lab with the latest technology. A library filled with thousands of books. Art studios, music rooms, recreational facilities, and a full-time staff of qualified teachers, social workers, and counselors." Bonnie stared at him in disbelief, tears streaming down her face. "But that's not all," Harrison continued. "We're going to create an innovative educational program. Instead of just reading about history, science, and art in textbooks, these children will learn hands-on using real artifacts, real examples, real experiences." He gestured toward his mansion filled with valuable objects. Bonnie was sobbing now, but they were tears of pure joy and disbelief. "Why?" she asked through her tears. "Why would you do all this?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. "Because you taught me something I'd forgotten," he said finally. "You taught me that wealth isn't about what you own, it's about what you do with what you have. You took my possessions and gave them meaning. You took objects that were gathering dust and used them to change lives." If this story is inspiring you the way it's inspiring me, let me know in the comments. And make sure you're subscribed, because what happened next will blow your mind. The transformation began immediately. Harrison didn't just hire any construction team, he hired the same architects and contractors who had designed museums and cultural institutions. The same attention to detail, the same quality materials, the same level of excellence that he demanded for his own properties. But more importantly, he put Bonnie in charge of every decision. Harrison hired a full-time staff of the best educators money could buy. Not just teachers, but specialists in hands-on learning, child psychology, and working with disadvantaged youth. He hired a full-time nurse and arranged for regular visits from pediatricians and dentists to ensure every child received proper medical care. He hired social workers dedicated to helping children navigate the foster system, find permanent homes, and build relationships with caring adults. He hired a chef trained in nutrition to ensure that no child would ever be hungry again, and that every meal would be both delicious and healthy. The grand reopening was scheduled for 6 months after that first conversation in Harrison's kitchen. But what happened on opening day exceeded everyone's wildest dreams. If this story moved you, if it made you think differently about the people around you, if it inspired you to look for ways to make a difference in your own community, then share it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and most importantly, share it with someone who needs to hear that their life has value, that their struggles matter, and that sometimes the most beautiful transformations begin when someone chooses to see beyond surface appearances to the heart underneath.